For the first time ever, Major League Pickleball teams are allowed to keep players on their roster year over year. In the past, there was always a hard reset with a complete redraft, but that is no longer the case. And the deadline for teams to decide which players they want to keep, which players they want to get rid of, has just passed. We're going to be breaking all of that down. We've got a few trades to talk about. Erik Tice from the Dink will be joining us. I'm Matty Pickles. Please like, please subscribe, go check out my YouTube channel. And to get things started, let's have some fun with pickleball data. Here on the y-axis, we have players' number of games won in the 2024 regular season, and on the x-axis, we have the keeper cost. This is the cost that teams will have to pay to the league if they want to keep these players. And this is equal to 1/2 of the price that was paid in the auction draft last year. So right away, up here in the top left, we've got Ben Johns, Annalie Waters, Anna Bright. These players are very expensive, but very worth it. Over here, we've got some really good value. These are players that won a ton of games, but don't cost a lot of money. The Dallas Flash kind of lived here. New Jersey had some players in here too. Down here is kind of the drop zone. Here we have James Ignatowicz, Riley Newman, Jack Sock, all left side dominant players that in 2025 maybe just aren't worth that price anymore because guess what? They were all dropped by their teams. We've also got Christian Alshon in the zone, but if we flip the y-axis from raw games won to game win percent, all of a sudden he's looking a little bit better. Also in this zone, we do have Andre Diascu, Dylan Frazier not too far from here. These are other expensive male players who didn't win a ton of games that have been traded. Now that we've had our fun with charts, let's really dive into the weeds. Okay, everybody. We are now joined by Erik Tice. Erik is the writer over at the Dink. If you haven't already, make sure to go check out all of his content there. Does an amazing job. We've got to get right into all this MLP madness. Erik, what the hell is going on?
It's pure and utter chaos. Real quick stat for you. 40% of the players that started on a team in 2024 are going to stay on that same team in 2025. So that means 60% of the players are not going to be on the team that they played for in 2024. Kind of crazy.
Which is pretty funny when you consider that we're supposed to be in this new kind of steady state roster continuity. You have keepers. We're not doing the full redraft every year. As much fun as the full redraft was, it's good to have, the same players on the same teams, but we've kind of just backdoored our way into a same convoluted, confusing mess of players switching rosters. Let's talk about these trades that have happened. Now, if you haven't watched, the last time Erik and I met, we did a video talking about the first trade window and kind of our expectations for who teams would drop. Go check that video out. I'm sure I've got it linked somewhere around here. But there was a whole other series of trades that really started popping off last week. Starting on February 11th, the Orlando Squeeze, they acquired Dylan Frazier and Lacey Schneemann from the newly renamed Phoenix Flames. They were the AZ Drive. Now they're the Phoenix Flames. And the Phoenix Flames, in return, got Tyson McGuffin and Megan Dizon. Things continued to kind of go crazy for Phoenix as they surprisingly sent Andre Diascu to the Columbus Sliders in exchange for Jay DeVilliers in cash. So all of a sudden, Phoenix, again, formerly AZ, has moved on from both those men, Andre and Dylan, who never quite gelled together. And Andre being the big surprise. What's your take on this?
Yeah, pure and utter chaos, like we said. It was announced that the Proton Group has taken an ownership stake in the Phoenix Flames. So it made total sense when they traded for Megan because she's one of the top Proton pros. And I was like, oh, and Andre and Megan have played together before. They're very good. Like this, all of this makes sense. And then all of a sudden, Andre was shipped to Columbus, and I was like, what is happening? I hit up pretty much every MLP inside source that I have and basically asked, what is Phoenix doing? And what is Charles Darling, like, what is the thought process here? And no one could give me a good answer that made any logical sense. I was listening to Jimmy Miller's podcast yesterday, and he said the only thing that actually makes sense to me in that CJ Klinger was already at Columbus. He's a very high-level signed Proton Pro. And because CJ's there, Andre going to Columbus makes some sense. They're going to be a really good team. They have Paris Todd. If they get one left side female, like, look out for Columbus. So they could be a very good team showcasing their Proton players. And the Proton team, the Phoenix Flames, will still have Megan Dazan. And we'll see in the upcoming draft, but this is kind of a preview for what we're going to talk about. I wouldn't be surprised to see Phoenix pay big to pick up a Kwang Duong and maybe sign him after his Selkirk deal is.
That's kind of been the speculation for Kwong. We've seen him switching paddles a little bit with drawing a lot of attention with that. Not sure if he was allowed to do that, but he did it anyway. Paddle contracts and competitors. It's been in the news lately, especially with Federico Stackford. But again, we don't have time to talk about that. Another deal that went down was, well, first of all, Will House ended up signing a UPA contract, meaning he became a keeper eligible player, which made New Jersey's decision a little tough. And they didn't wait till the keeper or drop deadline to make a move. They sent Mari Humberg down to the Challenger League in exchange for cash. Basically, if you're going to drop a player and you don't necessarily want to add her back, just get some cash in the door instead of just dropping them for nothing, is what went on there. The other trades we need to talk about is this is where I need your help. There was a 3-team trade involving, I mean, I don't know. Can you walk me through this one?
Yeah, so it is a little convoluted. Basically, here's what happened. Carolina sent Brooke Buckner to the Las Vegas Night Owls. The Night Owls went out and spent for Challenger. They now have a very, very good Challenger team. Vegas sent Judith Castillo to the SoCal Hard Eights. And Judith is a keepable player. Okay? So
yeah, the SoCal Hard Eights are newly promoted to Premier League. So yeah.
Exactly. And Judith is not only keepable, but she costs $0 to keep because she was challenger level last year. And then SoCal sent Yana Newell to Carolina. Yana Newell needed to be dropped by Carolina because she is not a UPA signed player.
So basically, Carolina just effectively dropped Brooke Buckner, but it did similar to what New Jersey did and got cash in exchange.
Exactly. Yep. That was the only incentive there to do that.
And then the final trade I think we need to talk about was the Atlanta Bouncers received Vivian Glossman from the New York Hustlers in exchange for Susanna Barr and cash consideration. Susanna Barr cannot be kept, so this was basically just another trade a player for cash situation.
Yeah, so a couple things go into that. Atlanta is looking really good now. They have three premier level players in Jaume, Todd Fote, and Vivian Glossman. That helps them keep their roster at a high value rather than going into the draft with just 2 signed players. And New York makes a bunch of money. So I think, a lot of people kind of didn't like that trade for New York specifically. I tend to agree just because Glossman is $0 to keep. So she is a hugely valuable asset. But I love the pickup from Atlanta, and I know that the cash considerations was a very, very high amount. I will say this about the New York Hustlers. Corey got money while receiving Vivian Glossman, and then he also got money while trading away Vivian Glossman. I think he made a ton of money on those trades, so he has some cash ready to go for the draft.
Now we get into the keeper drop window, remembering, again, each team had to drop at least one player. The player to be eligible as a keeper has to have signed a UPA contract and has to have been one of the originally drafted players in last year's draft. To keep a player, they have to pay half the price to the league that player went for in the 2024 auction draft. So with that, we're now going to go through each team and take a look at what they did in a little more detail. We will start with the Atlanta Bouncers.
Atlanta, this is a very easy one. With all of the trades, they had Vivian Glossman, Jaume Martinez-Vick, Todd Fote, and Emily Cedarquist, and they all cost $0 to keep. Emily is not a signed UPA player, so they dropped her and they kept everybody else. Great job by Atlanta getting some players before the draft.
And when you look at a roster currently constructed that costs $0, and you have Jaume Martinez-Vick and Vivian Glossman, those are probably 2 of the bigger bargains in the entire league. Moving on to the next team, we have the Carolina Pickleball Club, who, despite having the single most expensive player in Premier League, Ben Johns, who costs $420,000 to roster for each of the next 2 years, we don't really think they're a team that's going to spend a lot of money in this upcoming free agency draft. And just to recap what they did in this, they effectively traded Brooke Buckner down to Challenger League, where they got in return Yana Newell, who was required to be dropped. So now their roster is Ben, as we mentioned, Colin, who only costs $500, and
Gotta keep
Christian, yeah, So this is an interesting team here. I mean, Ben and Colin, I guess they're going to ride it out together. Maybe you can slide Colin into the substitute role. Maybe you can go get another man, but just don't really imagine them spending too much money.
Agreed. I think they're going to be, I don't think they're bidding in the first 10 to 15 bids even. Okay, so next we have a really fun one. It was a very difficult decision for Chicago. They dropped all their players. Why did they do that, Matty?
Well, they did that because not a single one of them are signed with a UPA contract. Jack Monroe, Brendan Long, Megan Fudge, and Allison Harris have not signed that UPA contract. And honestly, it would have been a pretty passable team as far as promoting from Challenger to Premier League go. I would have been interested to see how this team performed, but unfortunately, Chicago will be starting from scratch. Like, what do you even do if you're in their shoes?
So I have a couple things about this. I will get to your answer, but I do want to point out one thing. In speaking with the league yesterday, the league has left a window open for some of these players who are not contracted UPA players to, if they get contracted before the draft and they were a dropped player, the team is able to keep those players if they have enough roster spots to fill it. So, for example, we just went over the bouncers and Emily Cedarquist was dropped. If she were to sign, the bouncers can't pick her back up because she was their only drop. But Chicago, if the UPA can sign any one of those four players, Chicago would be allowed to keep them. So that is something to look out for in the next week or week and a half before the draft. But to your real question, what does Chicago do here? I also have a feeling that Chicago is not willing to spend much money. So I think they kind of go moneyball it and wait a while. And then, they find maybe they start. I would start off with two women and then just go from there in terms of who you're building your brand around. I do know that 35 Sports is the owner of that. So I would not be surprised to see them kind of go after some of those Paddle Tech Pro XR type players.
Yeah, interesting situation for Chicago. Not the only team that dropped all their players, the only team that was required
No.
to do so. We'll get to that later because first we've got to talk about the Columbus Sliders, who have a pretty new look from what they looked like coming into this whole kind of off-season period. They now have Andre Diascu at $265,000 to keep, Paris Todd, $92,500 to keep, and CJ Klinger, just $1,000 to keep, though they did have to send some cash out the door to acquire him. When you look at Andre, he's expensive. You look at CJ, he's cheap, kind of balances out. Their drop decision was to drop Callie Smith. So I think that's not really too surprising to me. You look at this roster. I mean, maybe they go back and get her if there's not a better player available. She could kind of fit on that team, right?
Yeah, for sure. I wouldn't be surprised at all if they went and got her or another left-sided player. Like I think if Columbus was allowed to keep all four, I think it would be a very realistic option to have kept all four. Next up we have DC.
So it's one of the more interesting ones because you have
Yeah, for
James
sure.
Ignatowicz, who a lot of people still think of as when he was at his peak, maybe his kind of 2023 form when he was winning a lot of PPA gold medals. 2024 just was not that great of a year for James. I don't know if he was fully healthy the whole year. If you look at the PPA stats between him and Dekel Bar just flat out had a better year than James Ignatowicz. And at a significantly cheaper keeper price of $76,000, it just kind of makes sense to move on from James. And if you want him, you can still go pick him up. What's your takeaway for here?
With Dekel being so much cheaper, I think this was an obvious decision.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, um, James and Jackie have played together, so they could very easily just go pick James up. And I would be very shocked if he cost nearly as much as the $250,000 keeper price he would have cost if they kept him.
Yeah, you mentioned James and Jackie playing together in the past. That was on the 2022 Texas Ranchers, drafted by my dad. Way to go, Dad. Shout out. Yeah.
I do have to give a quick shout out to MLP superfan Jake Gelvar for pointing out that I do think he is right that DC may go after Riley Newman. So I have to give a quick shout out.
Riley was on the DC team that made all
He
those
he
finals
was.
in
Yeah, and I don't know
2024.
how I didn't put that in my article, but
Partner him
yeah.
back up with Jackie Kawamoto too. Yeah, that
Mm-hmm.
could be interesting. That could be very
It
interesting.
could.
Okay. Up next, we have my rivals, the Dallas Flash, who I hate, by the way. And man, what a shame that they had to drop their team and break it up. You just hate to see that happen.
Yeah, I don't think you hate that, but I think a lot of Flash fans hate that.
Hayshay hates that.
For sure, Hey hates that.
This was an interesting decision, but it was, I mean, not too surprising. It kind of had to be him just because we talked about earlier all the factors going into the decision and the scarcity of just really good top level women. You can't drop Hurricane Tyra Black. You can't drop Georgia Johnson. You can't
No,
drop J Dub at that price. And I think it
nope.
just had to be Augie.
It had to be. And just a quick insight. Multiple sources told me Dallas received some what I will call very generous offers for Augie, meaning six figures and higher. And they turned them all down. So that tells me that they just don't really want to get off of him. I would assume he is one of the first picked up and Dallas gets him back.
Yeah, I mean, your options are basically drop a player for nothing or sell a player for cash. But if you do that, you can't go get him back. So turning down those offers definitely seems to be kind of signaling that we might be seeing the 2024 MLP champs running it back,
Right.
which would make a lot of people very happy. But I don't, I could care less.
Next up, we have the LA Mad Drops. And this was another super easy decision. They have Catherine, Jade Kawamoto, and Hunter Johnson, and they dropped Thomas Wilson because his health seems like he's at more PPA events this year. Seems like he's kind of getting himself back into the rhythm. I don't know if he's going to be able to play. So until it's like a firm, like, yes, I can play, this was an obvious drop.
Agreed. And it does set them up in an interesting situation where, I mean, they have like a really strong roster, and you'd have
They
to
do.
imagine they would have been good last year had they had full all their players available. So, I mean, this is a team that they could just be that one piece away, whether that's, Riley Newman, who has some experience playing with Catherine in the past and who also played with Jade on that DC team.
Yep.
Maybe he's the fit there. They've got a lot of options. They've got a roster that I think I think they can go a lot of different directions with which men they go for.
If you're one really good left side guy away, that is a much better position than a lot of other teams. And
Mhm.
there, like I said, there's a quite a few really good left side guys available in this draft.
All right, up next, we have another one of the recently promoted teams from Challenger League to Premier League, the Miami Pickleball Club. Their current roster costs $0. It is just Millie Rain and Eric Onsens. Uh, this is another team where, they're not quite in as bad of a spot as, say, the Chicago Slice. These players, I mean, Millie served she did pretty
Yep.
decently as a sub last year. She was part of that, Cinderella story where Paris Todd and the three subs beat the Utah Black Diamonds last year. So she's certainly a serviceable player. Eric Onsen's up and coming.
So Miami had to drop Bobby and because she's not signed, and Noah Cliff because he was not originally drafted. He was picked up in waivers.
And it's a shame they couldn't keep Noah Cliff because you imagine he's a player who will probably get added to a Premier League roster, and just because he's signed, but he wasn't originally drafted, so he's in the same boat
Right.
as like the Kwang Duangs. He
Yep.
definitely would have been a keeper, you'd have to imagine.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, up next, the New Jersey Fives, who had an interesting decision, but they just didn't wait till drop deadline to make it. We talked about this already with the trade. They decided to move on from Mari Humberg, and I think this was the right move. I'm curious if you agree.
Yes. And here's the reason why. I don't think the fives really care about money. They care about winning. So whoever, I think the fives are either going to pick up Leah Jansen or Kate Fahey, whichever one they want. And they're just going to pay the most amount of money for them. And then that person gets paired with ALW and we go from there. So yeah, I think it's a fine move.
And the reason I think it was the right move is just because of, first of all, how good Annalie Waters is. You have to imagine that she can more or less win with just about anybody. And if you're building your franchise around her and you have Mari Humberg as kind of the other piece, you're forcing Annalie Waters, your, franchise cornerstone, to play on the right side where I mean, she's still better than anybody else at that, but when she's on the left dominating court in women's doubles, that's kind of when she's at her best. So you're probably better served, in my opinion, finding somebody who complements her in that role, somebody who can play the right side in women's
Yeah.
doubles. And you get a little cash in for sending Mari down to Challenger, which, what a bummer for Mari. I mean, she's She was playing really
Yeah,
well. She was one like the highest win percentages paired up with Anna Lee, of course. But still, she deserves to be in Premier League.
just to for the audience, as soon as the draft is done, there is another trade window opening up until like the trade deadline in like June or July. So there's a large trade window. I would not be surprised to see some sort of draft day trade agreed where like a premier team picks up a third woman for Brooklyn, and then they swap, and Mari is all of a sudden in the premier level again.
Hmm.
There's a few players in there. Like I think there's 8 players in Challenger right now that should be in Premier because these Challenger teams were the ones that were willing to spend some money to get them. That I think Premier teams are going to be knocking on the door to try to get. And so I do think there will be some trades after where some of these elite level Challenger players are moved to Premier.
And just circling back real quick before we move on from New Jersey, the only other real consideration you'd imagine after Will House signs, who's such a good value, is do you keep Zane or do you keep Mari? Obviously, they decided to move on from Mari.
For sure. And multiple times I don't think she was like just saying this. Annalise said he is a very good captain and
Hmm.
helps the glue of the team. So I think that's a very underrated and like very subjective thing in MLP, but I think it's very clear that Zayn brings a lot of that.
Up next, we have the other team that dropped all of their players, and they weren't even required to do this. We have the New York Hustlers. Not only did they drop all of their players, they have moved on from their GMs, the NML guys. They're back to blogging now. Welcome back to this side of MLP, I guess. What is going on here? Why did they do this?
I have no idea, to be honest. So we'll start with I have no idea. But I mean, when they traded for Riley, and they gave up CJ, everybody's like, that's the worst trade ever. Well, because CJ basically costs, I think he costs $1,000 to keep, and he's a super high value, all of that, right? But I know for a fact that New York got over $500,000 in their 3 trades. So they built up a lot of money. They have a lot of money now where they can go out and spend. The one just confusing move for me personally is the Leia move
Hmm.
because in my opinion, she's the best doubles player that is going to be available on the women's side. And she was a keeper for $77,000. I don't know why she was dropped, but the other 2 guys, it was going to cost $550,000 to drop that, like to keep those guys. So dropping both, and then I very well could see them picking both back up. I don't know.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I mean, starting from 0 players is tough because the minimum bid is $10,000 for a slot. So you have to assume New York is going to have to spend at least 200,000, 300,000, 400,000, maybe to get a full 6-person roster.
The big if is just if they care about being competitive and if they want to spend the money, which we just don't know. We don't know. They got all this
We
money in
don't.
these trades, but is that just because it's kind of expensive to own an MLP team? Or is that just because they're going to now turn around and turn this cash into a competitive roster? We'll just have to wait and see. All right, here we've got the new look Orlando Squeeze. They now have Federico Staksrud and Dylan Frazier with Lacey Schneeman. So they are now in need of a woman. Their drop was Vivian David. Would they have kept Vivian if they were allowed to keep 4 players?
I think so. That makes the most sense to me. I definitely think that I don't know how much the Squeeze are going to be willing to spend, and if they aren't willing to spend top, I think they might try to go after Vivian again. I definitely think they would have kept her if they could have kept all 4. What about you? What do you think?
Yeah, I think probably. I do think, Viv's results haven't been quite as good, especially on mixed on the PPA Tour, because Thomas Wilson hasn't been able to play. They were a really good team together.
Right,
It
right.
just seems like I'm not seeing her as deep in draws as regularly. So maybe she's not worth that price anymore, but I don't know. I just like, is it, it's just tough to say. I think I probably would have just tried to roll with this roster for a little bit to see if it kind of worked.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I would have given it a shot for sure.
Moving along, we have the newly rebranded Phoenix Flames. They were the AZ Drive. They made all those trades, moved on from both their men. They now have Megan Dizon, Tyson McGuffin, and Jesse Irvin. Jesse Irvin is a very good bargain at the price, and she's playing pretty well lately. I think a lot better than people gave her credit for going into 2024. Their drop decision was to drop Jay DeVilliers, who was acquired in that trade that sent Andre to Columbus. Are you surprised by that move?
No, not really. Jesse is so cheap to keep at 11,000 that it would be very difficult to drop her. And Jay is now here's the deal. Jay was pretty cheap to keep. I think he was 76,000 if I remember correctly, but Jay is playing really well right now, and towards the end of 24 he wasn't because of his knee injury, and now he seems to be moving well. Like I've seen him in person play twice now, and I'm very impressed. So I could see him getting picked back up by a team kind of high because I think he is one of the better left side guys out there right now.
We now have these SoCal Hard Eights, and they are another one of the newly promoted teams from Challenger League. Their roster currently costs $0. They've got Arina Terashenko, Eric Lang, and now Judith Castillo, who was acquired in that convoluted, confusing three-team trade. And they dropped Max Manthau, aka Purple Jesus, who is not a UPA signed player.
This was the only drop they could have made, so that makes the most sense. And they'll be looking for a left side guy and go from there.
And
This was a pretty straightforward one.
and honestly, Arena is obviously one of the original MLP GOATs. Is she still a premier level player? Maybe you could have her be a sub. I think she'd be a fine sub. But if there is, a woman you're able to get that you think is better than her, I wouldn't be surprised if they kind of move a little earlier on that front too. Okay, and now we are up to the St. Louis Shock. Was this the most interesting team at this deadline with the decision to make? Maybe them, maybe New Jersey, but for my money, this was the one where people weren't sure. Obviously, Anna, you're not touching her. Hayden, you're not going to move him. It comes down to Gabe, or it comes down to Kate Fahey. It comes down to the scarcity versus the keeper price. They ended up dropping Kate. Would you have done that?
Me personally, I don't love the decision, but again, the Chafitzes have money, and it doesn't seem like they care too much about spending some money, so it's probably a wash. Gabe cost 92,500 to keep, and Kate only cost 8,500. I would have dropped Gabe because he costs $85,000 more to keep, and I think he could have been had for less than Kate is going to go for. So I think they would have saved money here. But if they were worried about some other team kind of going up and getting Gabe, and they just don't care about any money and they're just going to bid for Kate. Remember that I've gotten a lot of questions about this on Twitter, so I just want to point this out. In the draft, the teams do know who is bidding against them. So the Shock is going to know, like, okay, these 4 or 5 teams really need an elite level woman. And if one of those teams is bidding up a price, they probably know they're going after Kate. So I would say they're probably going to just bid whatever they need to get Kate back, if I had to guess.
Mm-hmm. Like if you see the Dallas Flash going really hard for that first pick, they're probably going to try to get their guy Augie back. If you see
Right, yeah, they're not going for Kate.
And if you see New Jersey going hard for that first pick, well, that's probably a woman coming off the board. So
Exactly.
now we are moving on to my team of choice, the Texas Ranchers. It wasn't really much of a decision to be made. Kwang Duong was not originally drafted. He could not be kept. He had to be dropped. So that's what they did. Do they go get him back, though, is the question. Or do they like one of these other men better? James Ignatowicz was a Texas Rancher in 2022. Maybe they want him back. Riley Newman could play with Christian Alshon. We've seen that on the PPA Tour. They could go a lot of different directions here. And again, being in a position where you need a left side man is kind of an enviable spot to be in. And they don't even need necessarily a strict left side men's doubles man because Christian could go both ways. So again, a lot of options to go here. Comes down to how much money do they want to spend. And our very last team is the Utah Black Diamonds. They're only last, folks, because this list is alphabetical. Has nothing to do with how much money we think they're willing to spend. But if we did order it that way, they might be last as well.
Agreed.
They had to drop Jeannie Bouchard, who, if they didn't have to drop her, they probably would have done that anyway.
Yeah, for sure they would have dropped her, but I could see a world where Utah picks her back up. I mean, I think it's very clear that Jeannie has actually started putting in work the last 6 months. She's gotten a win over Brooke in singles. her doubles.
She looked good in the pickleball slam the other night
Yeah, I mean,
against,
I don't know what level of competition that is, but yeah, she did look good. She could be a target for them. We know Utah isn't going to spend, so like, I think she's in the running there to go back. I wouldn't be surprised.
So that just about does it. That's all the teams we've gone through. Is there anything else we need to talk about? I mean, the as far as I know, there's kind of going to be a quiet period where we're waiting for the draft, which is going to be on March 2nd. The Challenger draft will then be the very next day. And then after that, trade period opens up again. Is there any more surprises that we could expect between now and then?
I think the UPA is intent on signing some more players, so I wouldn't be surprised to see the draft pool increased a little bit between now and the draft.
Speaking of the draft pool, is this something that we're going to be able to see? And I don't mean we as in, you're in the media, you get to see everything. Is this something that, people watching this, are they going to be able to see the draft pool before the draft?
Yeah, so I'm planning on an article later, either later this week or probably, honestly, with the PPA Mesa happening, I'm there every day this week. So I'm guessing it'll come out next week, but I will include an entire player pool and some info on some lesser known players. So you could be on the lookout for that. But yeah, I am allowed to share UPA eligible player list. It's just a little bit bogged down right now.
Okay, well, there
Um,
you have it, folks.
yep.
Make sure to follow Erik on Twitter. Check out all of his content that he writes and publishes over at The Dink. I mean, it's literally, if you want to be in the know, he's the guy to follow.
Appreciate that, Matty.
Uh, Hope you enjoyed this video. Be sure to like and subscribe. I hope you enjoyed this video. Be sure to like and subscribe. Follow Erik wherever he can be followed. And stay tuned. We've got some more exciting announcements. We're going to be planning to do a lot more of these videos together, so stay tuned for that.